that roll call be taken.
Angie Lee,
Present.
Swabula, Lyra,
Present.
Scott,
Present.
Roberts,
Present.
Hess,
Present.
Geyer,
Present.
Yang.
Thank you. We're going to start our meeting with a land acknowledgement. This is one that was drafted by our committee and is continuing to be worked on and will change as our committee continues to define our mission and our goals and our outlook. And so I will read the one that we have drafted currently. We are gathered here on the lands that were originally home to the Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations. We honor the Menominee and Ho-Chunk communities and are grateful for their stewardship of the land and waters. We acknowledge these ancestral grounds as sacred and remember the complex history of settler colonialism on these lands and the effects that persist today. We commit to a restorative and healing relationship of the original inhabitants and our community. Thank you. Next, we'll go ahead and approve the minutes from our May 24th meeting.
I move to approve the minutes from the May 24th meeting.
I second.
Heather, can we take roll?
Actually, Angie, now that we are in person, we can just do an aye and a nay vote, if you are okay with that. If you would like us to call roll, we can, but now that we're in person, we can simplify a little.
Wonderful. All those in favor of approving the minutes from our May meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Oppose.
Any opposed? Thank you. Just figuring this out. All right. Next, we'll move on to citizen statements and citizen comments to the DEI committee.
Actually, Angie, I'm sorry, we do have to do the election of the chair and the vice
Thank
chair.
you.
And I will do that on behalf of the committee for the chair. So we do need to elect a chairperson. I will call for nominations 3 times. We will then have a motion to close nominations and vote. So at this time, I call for nominations of a chair. A second is not required. We are just taking nominations at this time. So would anyone like to make a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Ashley.
Oh, I would nominate Tim Burr, but I don't see him here. Is that, how does that work?
So actually, Timber will not be joining us, so
okay.
unfortunately, we cannot nominate him.
All right, well then I will retract that. Thank you.
Okay, any other nominations for chair?
Well, in that case, can we nominate Angie for a second term here? Is that appropriate? So
You certainly can.
I would nominate Angie Lee to continue her role as chair.
Okay, third and final time, any other nominations for chair? All right. So what we obviously will do is, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I need to make a motion to close the nominations. Make a nomination. Would anyone like to make a nomination to close? Or make a motion to close?
Close the nomination.
Need a second for that? I'll second.
All those in favor of closing the nominations? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
Okay, we will then call the roll for the election of chair. We will be requesting each member announce their choice when their name is called.
Lee,
Ashley.
Lyra,
Ashley?
Scott,
Angie.
Roberts,
Ashley.
Hess,
Angie?
Geyer,
Ashley.
And that is it. So it is Ashley.
Mhm.
4 for
4 for Ashley.
Yep, 4 for Ashley.
Okay. Ashley Hess has been selected as chair. So then I would like to turn that over to Ashley to do the nominations for the vice chair.
Oh, just like that, huh? Oh, that's sweet. Okay. Well, then I'd like to call for nominations for vice chair. We've called 3 times. Second is not required. So I'll call for a nomination for vice chair from any.
I nominate Angie Lee.
I nominate Joaquin Lyra.
Okay, I'll call again. Any other nominations for vice chair? For a second time? Nominations for vice chair for a third? Okay, it's been called 3 times. Again, a second is not required. You need a motion to close the
I move to close the nominations.
nominations? Okay.
Second.
All right, I guess then it's time to cast our votes. Is that correct?
Lee,
Joaquin.
Lyra,
Angie?
Scott,
Angie.
Roberts,
Joaquin.
Hess,
Angie.
Geyer,
Angie.
Angie is vice chair at 4.
Thank you.
Well, Anjali has been selected as our vice chair. Yay, congratulations.
Thank you. So Michelle, would Ashley then continue, or would Ashley start to facilitate then, or?
Yes, yes, if Ashley is comfortable, of course, we will certainly help him along if needed, since this is I'm sure, a bit of a surprise.
It is a bit of a surprise, but yes, and as long as you're willing to help me along, that'd be great. Okay, I guess at this point, I would welcome our citizens and guests to the event and to our meeting. If there are any comments from the community, I'd like to open that up for opportunity. We have limited each statement to 5 minutes.
We have not had anyone register. I don't know if there's anyone here
Registered
who's
guests.
seeking to make any comments. Yep, if you would like to, our podium is right there for citizen comments. And we do generally ask that you, of course, introduce yourself.
Hi, aim this up at me here.
Please
Hi.
do. Yes, hello.
My name is Bria Ostertag. I'm currently serving the city of Oshkosh as Miss Oshkosh. And I'm here today to talk to you all about something that I've been working on, which is helping to make Oshkosh a better place for the LGBT plus community. Oshkosh is one of very few cities in Wisconsin. There are a dozen places right now that have a ban against conversion therapy. Oshkosh currently does not. Conversion therapy is defined as any practice aimed at changing an individual's sexual orientation or their gender identity. It is a very dangerous practice, if any of you are familiar. It can also be referred to as gender critical therapy, reparative therapy, sexual orientation, and gender identity change efforts. Conversion therapy assumes that a person's sexuality being anything other than heterosexual or their gender being anything other than cisgender is a mental illness and can be changed. There have been research by the American Psychological Association which has proven that conversion therapy is not effective, and the American American Psychological Association has not defined any sort of gender or sexuality other than, of course, the heterosexual or cisgender as a mental illness since 1973. Conversion therapy is most commonly now used as a form of talk therapy. However, there are some extreme and rare forms that include things like electric shock, force feeding and food deprivation, forced nudity, forced isolation, and confinement. Obviously, these physical forms of conversion therapy appear extremely dangerous, and they are, but talk therapy is just as dangerous. Those in the LGBT plus community are at a much higher risk than those not for suicide and for depression, anxiety, and homelessness. Conversion therapy increases those rates. In fact, it increases risk of suicide by 2 times for the LGBT plus community. The Trevor Project has found that 10% of LGBT plus youth have been victims of conversion therapy, and 78% of those reported reporting when they were under the age of 18. Now, of course, conversion therapy is very controversial, so anybody who practices it keeps it very private, and it's very difficult to know when it is happening in your community. However, if we look at the number of 10% of LGBT plus youth that are affected by it, we can assume that it may be happening somewhere in our community. To preserve the right to religious freedoms, other cities in Wisconsin and other states and cities around the United States have left out any sort of conversion therapy in their bans that is performed by religious leaders. And the United States Supreme Court has upheld those bans that do leave out religious leaders. So to avoid any conflict in that term, any sort of ban should include licensed mental health professionals licensed by the state, for example, licensed clinical social workers or licensed other mental health professionals. Banning conversion therapy is not a political issue. I know it might seem like one, but in many states around the United States that have passed bans on conversion therapy, there have been Republican governors who have passed those bans. Like I said earlier, 12 cities banned conversion therapy. The most recent one was Sun Prairie. In Sun Prairie, it was reported that there was no evidence of conversion therapy happening in that city, but they still passed that ban anyways, knowing that it's an abusive practice and that LGBT plus youths must be protected. It is also a symbolic ban that could in fact benefit Oshkosh in a lot of ways. We are known as Event City, but there is no particular Pride event that happens during the month of June. Pride events can bring in a lot of tourism and boost our economy. There was one just yesterday in Fond du Lac that I attended as Miss Oshkosh because it was very unfortunate to see that we don't have a Pride event in Oshkosh. A few years ago, Oshkosh was tied with Racine for being the lowest rated city in Oshkosh for LGBT plus equality. This was 2 years before Racine passed their ban for conversion therapy. So I would expect that now they would be rated higher than us. There are 20 states that ban conversion therapy. Oshkosh is not one of them. Wisconsin is not one of them. The only ban in Wisconsin is that any state taxpayer dollars within Wisconsin funding conversion therapy on LGBT minors is not to be used. So currently there is no protection for LGBT youths who would want to come forward if they were being subject to conversion therapy. And even though it's very difficult to see if this is happening in our community, it's important to have that ban in place for symbolic measures, for protections for our youths, so that if they come forward, there is something that can actually be done about it. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are we asking questions now, or?
If you would like, you can certainly ask questions.
So this ban is going to be for under 18 and under?
That's correct.
So if you are already 18 and above, and that's something that you volunteer, someone could still practice it.
Mm-hmm.
This is specifically for minors, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions from our committee at this time?
If you do have any questions in the future, Aaron does have my email. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you for your time. Okay, well, I guess barring that there are no other individuals from the community that want to speak, are we moving into our next discussion? Again, thank you. I appreciate you coming and presenting that information to us. It's helpful. We need to talk about the facilitator for our plan development. We had learned that the FEI has not have the capacity, so we are kind of back to square one on that front. And I guess it's open for discussion if there are some ideas or thoughts that anyone has at the moment on how to proceed forward in filling in that gap, or working to meet our our objectives here as far as what we've been charged with as a committee. I don't know if anyone's had some time to think about it since we learned of the news. Angie?
One thing I was thinking was whether we could divert those funds that we were going to use to hire FEI towards hiring a diversity and equity inclusion coordinator for the city. I know that's something that we have talked about as a committee, just in passing. It's not been on our agenda, but that is something that I would, like to discuss and potential. I know it's tied in, but perhaps this coordinator would be the facilitator and then be the executor as well of carrying out some of these plans. So I would see a little bit of consistency and more coordinated efforts then between our committee and this coordinator position.
Are the funds that were allocated ongoing, or was that just a one-time?
I'd have to ask.
I was
administrators.
allocated $5,000 annually. $1,000 goes to our GARE membership. The other $4,000 is available to, through my budget to utilize to further this agenda.
Okay. Well, that's definitely not enough to hire anyone. On a long-term basis, it's certainly enough, perhaps to get something under contract in that regard. So, Angie, I like the idea, and I know that it's something, it seems like it'd be appropriate for us to include in our recommendations and things here along the way. And I think that is something we can likely discuss further, and it would make sense. I was just recalling Dr. Robinson had presented an individual. I think there was some familiarity with the group's work already. I do not recall his name, but there was somebody else who had put a bid in for, or at least expressed interest for the FEI, the contract that they have obtained. So I'm just thinking you may have some other potential leads for us to go down. I'm not certain.
Here we go.
But, that was my thinking, as far as how to move forward with this, so, I don't know.
There's also a lady from the Public Health Department, Winnebago County Public Health Department, who is currently assisting the county DEI committee with developing their strategic plan. She may be willing to do the same, seeing that she's got a little bit of background and knowledge about this. Very good. She's got a lot of experience with assisting with strategic planning, but she might be interested.
Well, at this time, I personally think, I'm not sure how we would really move forward with it, because you can certainly collect some names and lists, and John, I don't know if you have something you'd like to add, perhaps this might be the best time, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to add some other ideas.
Thank you.
I think Michelle certainly could also add, we had some people that participated in our RFP, or request for proposals, when we looked at trying to get someone to help us out. So we could certainly share those names with the group. We had one consultant that we were very excited and were hopeful for, that she would also participate in the RFP. At the time, she was so swamped that she declined, but that's another person that we had observed at different conferences that was just exceptional. We were hopeful that she would have the time available, but she unfortunately didn't. That's another resource, and we certainly could, explore the person that was discussed that's helping the county too, and we could bring those names to the group, and then if you'd like to have us proceed, we certainly could evaluate that and go forward as we did with with our consultant too. We could help with that process. Make sure that there were no concerns by anybody that someone was hand-selected or anything like that. So we'd be happy to help you in any way that we can. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to share, Michelle?
Right, and, certainly there are people out in the community. Again, I do remember Dr. Robinson mentioning one. There are a few people around the area that do specialize in DEI. You know, some of them more do training, others do facilitation. But we could certainly take a look at what names, and if you have any names you want to send to me, I can always put a list together for us to discuss further, so that we're bringing in all of, I guess, all of your thoughts, and again, making sure that we give everybody an opportunity for this, if anyone is interested in helping our committee.
Well, I would appreciate that. I think, I'd recommend, you can speak for all of us, I think it'd certainly be very helpful if you could do that, kind of gather some of those names. It's already been vetted. That would certainly take some of our legwork out of it. If anyone has any suggestions, maybe you could get them probably to Michelle this week, perhaps, might be helpful if you have a thought. Yeah, and then we'll just kind of take it from there. I do have a question, though. You said if it's 4,000 annually, we're coming up, you know, is that federal fiscal, you're using the state? Like what, when's your fiscal year end and start? And then
January
can money
1st.
be rolled over from this year into next, or like, or are we stuck with this $4,000 budget to try to find someone to work within that dollar amount? I just wondering if that's flexible or hard and fast, because it might be a little challenging, and we really have to scope it right, you know?
Right, and I think initially, the other resource I would mention too is GARE. You know, we do have
Right.
that membership with GARE, and they may have some resources that we might be able to draw upon too, and I neglected to mention that earlier, so I just wanted to get that in. But I think initially, we hadn't talked about the idea. We didn't anticipate that the group may want to hire a facilitator or a consultant. So I think that $4,000 was originally intended just to provide some support to the group.
Okay.
Now, depending upon what the group would like to do and how you'd like to go forward, we can certainly reevaluate that amount. And our budget is a calendar year budget, but we're approaching the time where we are putting together budget numbers. So how I think this would work is the way that Michelle talked about it. I think if we explored some possibilities and discussed, you know, what the group needed, and then came up with what you thought might be a reasonable amount of money to secure those services.
Sure.
We could certainly present that as part of Michelle's budget, and then it wouldn't be limited to that amount of money. That $4,000 is for this year. Whether it can be rolled over for next year or not,
Yeah.
I think that's something we could explore, but maybe it may be a moot point depending upon what the group would like to do.
Right, right.
I will say that it's very rare for us to budget for boards and commissions. It's something that the city of Oshkosh hasn't done historically, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. And I think this is a very important group, certainly, and, you know, whatever we can do to support your efforts, that's what we want to do. So I wouldn't be dismayed by that, just the fact that it hasn't been done. So, but I think, you know, once we can capture what your desires are, you might have a better idea of what it might cost, and then we can, Michelle would be happy to place that in her budget, and we'll see what we can do.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Anybody comments or anything else? 'Cause
So what would the next step be? I mean, is it possible for Michelle to give us a list of viable options prior to the next meeting, so that we could at least see what those options are and be prepared to discuss them? Or,
it could be, I would see that's likely. I'm also thinking we need to scope this out. I have a vision as to what we're looking to get done. We have a document to produce. We're all volunteers. It was sort of laid on the table when we jumped on board here, and, you know, it's kind of a shared obligation, in my opinion, you know, so I appreciate the support, and being an advisory committee, you know, we're being asked to do it's kind of a big lift. That's kind of why I like hearing, like, all right, it is a unique opportunity or situation, so I get that. But I would like to at least try to figure out, like, what do you need as far as an SOW? What do you need? I'd say, or could we get your assistance in just really scoping out? We see what our charge is. We have a few examples of what we're looking to produce. We've already decided, you know, like I said, I believe the Beaverton, Oregon, you know, just sort of just a structure, you know, and then sort of some of that, I think, was we can kind of demonstrate what we're looking for. I just, you know, I don't know what you need to do to kind of, again, put out a new RFP essentially, or is this going to be less technical, or is it going to be a similar process that you had to go through with the?
We
facilitator.
certainly could do a formal RFP, which would then give the opportunity for everyone to
Yeah, I'm not suggesting.
show
to
interest.
you. I'm just wondering what is the
And I
appropriate-
guess, you know, one thing that we could do, request for proposals is just the jargon that we use, you know, acronym that we use. But there's also another purchasing tool that we can use, and it's called an RFQ.
Okay.
And it's a request for
Quote.
quotes. And as part of that process, oftentimes the consultants or the vendors will suggest what they can provide
That would be
and provide ideas to the group that we may not have thought about. Certainly, we can define it with the group, or we could use that other option, and then we could have groups present to you and say, hey, you know, I worked with Beaverton, Oregon. I worked with this community and that community. This is what we did. This is how it worked. You know, how does that, is that something you'd be interested in? So that might be another way, if the group would like us to explore that potential possibility. But I wouldn't want to limit, you know, what the group wants to do. We could certainly, if you're aware of other consultants that you'd like to give to Michelle, we could do it that way too, and we could explore with those folks as well as the ones we already know. Or we could do a combination. We could gather information from all of you, augment that list with people that we know, and then we could send we could still set up an RFQ with those, that finite group that we know, and then send it out to see if there's anyone else that we don't know. So we could do kind of a combination of that as well. It's really up to the group. But I just want to temper your expectations. You know, I don't think that we have unlimited budget resources, but so I think we'll have to see what you're interested in, what might be possible, and then try to arrive at some point that you think is the proper direction for the community.
Well, I know, I appreciate that. And I, for one, thank you for reminding me of the RFQ process. That seems most logical, I think, in our circumstance, perhaps. But I don't know if we'll, you know, want to make a motion on that, or if we need to, you know, perhaps discuss it and come back to you. We can just talk offline. You know, I'm not really certain.
And there's no formal, you don't have to take any formal action if you don't,
Yeah.
if you wish, if you have consensus of the group. We certainly can go back and explore that, and you can provide any names you
Okay.
do have to Michelle, and then we can bring all that information back as soon as possible.
I like the third idea you just spoke about with putting together different people that we all know and that you are already aware of, putting together a request for quote and then sending it out to that group plus anyone else who might have interest. And then we could put all of that together to try and, I think that's a really nice, very encompassing idea.
Could we maybe listen from some of those parties before we get into that whole thing and just kind of cut on time? You know, because we can hear 10 and all of a sudden we're wasting time. We're
That's-
already
yes.
mid-year.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
so I'm
indeed.
wondering if we can streamline it a little bit and maybe get to know a little bit about who we're tagging and then focus on where we want to go with that.
One variant of that process would be exactly the way that you described it. So let's just say hypothetically that we have a lot of groups that are interested in helping us. Then, you know, we could winnow that group, that amount down based on what they submit and decide, hey, we'd like to hear from these 5 groups. They seem like the most interesting to us. They seem like they provide the most the most varied options for us to consider, or it's really more what we're thinking about in terms of sensing the community and then, you know, working with the city after we get that information. So we could do it that way. It depends really, I think, on the amount of interest that we receive too.
Certainly. Well, I think we're all probably in the same page that we can streamline this and get us moving along here. Sooner the better.
So what I hear you saying is the group, if you're aware of anyone, you'll get your information to Michelle. We'll augment that group, and then we'll also talk to purchasing about our RFQ process. And depending upon how many people we receive, you know, we can just cull that group down if necessary, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Does that sound?
Sounds very reasonable to me.
Are we able to get things in writing to sort of like bullet point before people come?
Yes, I guess what I was thinking of is ordinarily we'll work with purchasing on a process like this. And purchasing will recommend, hey, we would like to provide some idea to this group what you're looking for. And so we could discuss that with purchasing. We could come up with some parameters. We could share that with the group and see if you'd like to tweak those parameters. So when it goes out to the group, we get the sorts of consultants that are of interest to you. Maybe some that have some experience working with a group like yours, that are more focused on the community and then bringing the community's concerns back to the organization, which is the charge of this group.
Well,
Something like that.
Yeah, so I think that sounds like logical next step. And I'm just wondering, is it reasonable to say by next month, would we be able to have, you know, something to look at and kind of move forward, you know, with.
In terms of the structure for the RFQ?
Yes, you know, just getting
I
all the
think so.
pieces together and our candidate.
I think so. Purchasing is something that's,
It's pretty, yeah, I'm sure.
it's in my department, and it's a
Not-
colleague of Michelle's, so I think we'll be able to talk to them pretty quickly and
Okay.
incorporate the folks that you're interested in too. So hopefully we can get that all ready for you to take a look at going forward.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, appreciate it, thanks.
Welcome.
Any other discussion kind of on that topic here, as far as necessary? Anyone? Nothing else? Okay. Great, 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 great. Now, I will be quite honest, the next item on our agenda, discuss potential options and next steps regarding initiatives to prohibit conversion therapy in Oshkosh. I think we kind of had a bit of a discussion, sort of informally and not necessarily in that order. At this point, is there, you know, we've set aside some time, but yes, John? Yes.
I guess if I could just add too, and I know it's
Please.
really your first meeting in person,
Yeah.
so I hope you don't mind me just providing a little bit of structure.
No, that's probably a really good idea.
Yeah, no. I think you're all doing great, so first of all. But I think initially, citizen statements and comments are really designed for items that are not on the agenda. So I thought, Ms.
Yes.
Olszewski, you did a great job talking about conversion therapy, but I think that's what that section is. And then when we get to those items, as you were suggesting, Ashley, we would talk, and then we would have someone who is interested in speaking up to that subject, talk about it at that particular point in time.
And that would make sense, and again.
Yeah.
If it was registered, and that would totally make sense.
Right, and then any other item that we have going forward. So it's not a big deal. She already spoke on the subject, but then you could certainly pick up and have dialogue about it at this point if you wish.
Right, and that's kind of what I'm just, piecing it together here, but thank
Right.
you for the reminder.
Sure.
Again, you know, other thoughts, you all want to have further discussion at this time?
With potential options, is one of them that we could make a recommendation to the council to put forth a motion to ban it? Is that
That's,
a potential option for us?
I believe so. That's, as far as I'm understanding, where this intersects with our committee, you know, and as far as making recommendations to city council, it seemed like it would be an appropriate thing if we so felt.
I think Aaron would love to maybe give some of the council's
Thank you.
history on this
That would
as
be
well.
very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Aaron Wojciechowski, so I am the new council liaison. I'm very happy to be on this committee, but I'm kind of jumping right in. I was the one who asked to have both of these topics on here. And just for some context, I mean, personally, like, this has been an issue that I have been working on for the last 3 to 4 years, even when I was on the county board, is something I introduced. But with the city, we have a little more leeway in what we can actually do to address this issue. And so I guess the point of me wanting to put this on is to get something to council recommending that we do make this ban. And I know there were some questions about, you know, what age group does this prohibit and such, and that really would come down to whatever recommendation the committee makes and what you're comfortable sending to council. But I did have a discussion with City Manager Mark Roloff, and he did mention that this was an issue that was discussed at a previous council before I was on, and they wanted to send it to this committee for it to kind of be their responsibility in taking the lead. So this is something that council had directed specifically to this council previously, or sorry, this committee previously. So I thought it was important to bring back and hopefully get it on our council agenda.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate that little background.
Right, and I do think that the council was hoping that you would take some time to allow and invite, before making any motions, time for citizens to participate and hear their thoughts. It was great that we had a speaker today, but I think there will be others that will certainly be interested in having your ear on this subject, if you're going to make recommendations to the council going forward. So I think that there's a lot of next steps that you guys could discuss here in order to educate yourselves, right? Because this is possibly the first time some of you have ever heard about this subject, you know, in order to determine where you want to go with this.
Can you further define or describe how that would look in terms of soliciting more input from the community? You know, it was on the agenda, we had someone speak. What would those further steps look like for us to seek more input?
Right, I think for today, you know, we just put on there a discussion to begin the process. If it looks like you're going to be making a recommendation to council, I feel as though there will be more interest in coming and speaking to you about potentially what it should or should not include in order for you to make a very clear recommendation to the council with specifics, correct?
But don't we
Rather-
have to sort of make that recommendation in order to get that on the agenda, to get the people? I'm just trying to figure out how, step by step, because putting it on the agenda as is probably isn't going to solicit that. So don't we have to have something that would indicate that we might be making a recommendation in order to get the people to?
Correct. So you may want to put it on a future agenda, and I saw John get up for a moment, and then he sat back down, but, you know, if you are specifically asking for input or looking to make a recommendation at a future meeting, I think that would help people be aware that this, that you're looking for that assistance in, you know, educating this committee in order to make that recommendation.
Those are potential options. And
Do
here-
we solicit specific groups that we know have an interest in this? Or is it just a shotgun saying it's on the agenda? And those who are aware of the process of coming to speak are aware and they come. If you're not, too bad. So do we solicit?
I certainly think there's multiple ways you could do that, you know, including going back to the community, your own groups and such that may have information or some experience in this. Certainly, I know our city attorney and police chief, of course, have been involved in conversations about this as well, and I'm sure I would be able to ask them to provide some of their input as well. And he sat back down again, so I'm not quite sure.
Well,
And he's a good.
no, other thoughts or questions, or? Because just given what you just shared there, I would, for one, okay, this is interesting. Yeah, so if the city attorney has inputs, I mean, if there is already some input documentation from other parts of the city, I think it would be very helpful so that we're all in alignment with something here, especially legally. I mean, it's gonna need to be a lot of other, you know, work that would have to go into this. John, I don't know if you have something you'd like to add to that.
Sure,
right
if
now.
I could. You know, as Aaron mentioned, this is a topic that's been discussed by the council in the past. So
Okay.
there's been significant research that's been done by the city attorney as well as the police chief on the subject in regard to just all aspects of what would be in the community's best interest from the perspective of how we would manage this process. So without getting too deeply into it, because it's really their area of expertise, one of the things that I'm aware of is in terms of managing complaints. It's my understanding that the county has more ability to shield minors if there was something that was taking place that was inappropriate and went out beyond the scope of what we're talking about in terms of the topic itself. So that's just an example of one of the considerations that this group may want to evaluate before approving or recommending an issue go forward. So, and that's not intended to sway the group one way or another, but it's just an example. So what I would envision is, just as we did with the Chief Oshkosh Monument project that is later on the agenda, we would provide you with a memo, provide you all the background so you could have all that information so you know what was discussed in the past. And as Michelle said, you know, we certainly could have other staff members come here and you could ask them questions about, you know, how would this work practically? How would it be established? What are the pros? What are the cons for your consideration? In addition to anyone from the community that would like to speak on it. So I guess the way to think about it is, and I know this group is just still new, you know, we as staff are a resource for you. As you know, Ashley mentioned earlier, you know, we're so grateful that you're spending your time doing this, but we understand that you have other responsibilities too, and you can't dedicate tremendous amounts of time to this. So whatever we can do to provide information for you to help make your decision making easier, that's really what our responsibility is from a staff perspective. So those are just some examples. Hopefully those are helpful.
It's very helpful. I think we'd appreciate and make a request that if you have a memo you could draft that really kind of lays out, you know, the city's position from a legal perspective, the police from the management and oversight perspective. And Aaron, by all means, if you have something to add, please.
I mean, my opinion would be to have a workshop with all those varying groups so you can create the document, get that input, bring it to the committee, and then have public input. I mean, workshops can include public input as well, but if the goal is to, and I don't mean to, you know, bring offense, but if it's to make this process as slow as possible, we can take all those steps. But this isn't, in my opinion, an issue that needs to take that long. We are well aware of the issue. Many neighboring cities have done something about it. I don't think we need to drag our feet on this, and I don't mean to be the person who comes in here, you know, trying to rush everything, but I think we can do this in an efficient way. I think workshops, at least the ones that I've been at, have been really effective. There you're able to invite specific people to give their input, their expertise, and use that in crafting, you know, the resolution or ordinance, whatever it be, that would eventually then come to the committee to do a rereading or get more public input. I think a workshop would be the best approach, but that's just my opinion.
I would agree with you, Aaron, that this is an urgent issue and one that should not be delayed. I would recommend that, you know, we add this to next month's meeting and that we make a swift decision and recommendation, and maybe perhaps those details can be can evolve a little bit as we go through, but I think that recommendation feels urgent according to the site, you know, what was cited and the research out there as far as the risk that this practice poses to our youth.
Aaron, what type of timeline were you thinking of when you mentioned workshop?
I mean, that would really be up to the committee and what you can schedule. I mean, workshops can be scheduled outside of the traditional meeting. So like, I mean, if you want to, you could make it a workshop at the next meeting. You could do one before if you felt it was that urgent. I guess it's really up to the committee. I mean, personally, I would like to see this to council as soon as possible, but there are steps that need to be taken. And I do think it is worthwhile getting input from people like the city manager, from legal and all that, just to make sure what we're doing is correct. And sorry, just as a starting point too, I know Appleton did something very similar, and I believe theirs passed, and they went through a lot of the legal, you know, processes and battles that they had to do to get it passed. You know, so if there's a community to look at that's similar to ours, they did something as a starting point.
Thank you. I just worry that our agendas are sometimes very long, and the process of getting all of that input and having people have the opportunity to speak and us to discuss it could be a long process, could be very lengthy, versus if we had that opportunity process possibly outside of one of these meetings. I'd just like to throw that out there for you guys to, and then we could be ready at one of the next meetings to further discuss what action to take.
Could we schedule a workshop sometime before our next meeting?
I'm open to everybody needs some guidance as to the structure. How do you get the members? How do you select the members? How many members are there? That kind of thing. You know, I'm not familiar with that process, so I just need more information. But I'm open to.
Generally, our workshops include the entire committee, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if people can't make it, they certainly understandable. Could be something that is done during the workday or an evening, again, outside of this meeting. Obviously, we would want to communicate to the public as well as talk to our internal staff so that they could be there to, again, give all that input that Aaron was talking about. So, you know, I know all of you have work schedules as well, so your availability, obviously, certainly is something that we need to take into consideration. I could poll your committee regarding, you know, a good time for a workshop if you'd like. In the meantime, obviously, I know we don't have everybody here today, but see if we could find some common times where a workshop could be held.
So can you elaborate a little more? The workshop, I mean, there's us, and then there's people from the community, and we're all going back and forth with information. I mean, if 100 people show up, is that enough, if that's okay for a work? I mean, I'm trying to understand, what does it look like, you know? Are we gonna have 20 people, 30 people, 40 people? It's open, completely open, and then we just have discussions, and then at the end of that, we are the decision makers of that workshop, or is the workshop just the majority makes a recommendation?
Please, Aaron, you had mentioned we can.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the workshop process is typically, like, discussion is limited to those who are invited to the workshop. I mean, the public can attend and watch, but at least the workshops I've been at, there is usually no public input at the workshop. It's, you know, like the committees and the council or whoever is invited to be along that process. Because really the workshop is them creating the document, you know, putting all the discussion out there to actually craft something, and then the public input would come when it's actually at the committee to vote on or perhaps to table whatever decision they make. So regardless, you know, there would be discussion here at the committee, and then if it did go to council, obviously we would have our first reading and second reading, so there would be, you know, multiple opportunities for the public to speak on this issue.
How do we select the members of that workshop?
That's up to the committee, I think.
I really like the idea of the workshop. I do think that there's some urgency to this. I would love to hear from somebody from Appleton to see why they did it, how they did it, the barriers, kind of where they were and where we are. I think that would be extremely helpful. They're not, you know, they're larger, I mean, you know what I mean. But I do think that that would be helpful, as well as I'm sure that you can help us identify other people who should be involved in that. And so my understanding is it's really a lot of information gathering. And then during this workshop is the time when we as a committee, after we've learned this information, put together our next steps. What are we looking at? And then it goes out to the committee saying, we are going to have this discussion. You're welcome to come do your 5 minutes, but you have to let us know you're coming. After all of that information gathering, after the workshop, the individuals coming, at that point, we as a committee really are the ones that say what we want to see to the council. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Yes, you as the committee would determine what you wanted to recommend specifically to the council. All right,
I
so.
think it would be very helpful if you could send out like a survey of availability to
I
all of
will.
us. And maybe either at the same time or similar time to start putting together that list of people that would be invited. You know, we could look at what some neighboring communities like Appleton did, some recommendations from all of us. So we could start to kind of simultaneously look at an available date and potential invitees.
Okay, if you'd also like to send me your recommendations for invitees, then I can gather, get that back out to everyone. And we'll survey 4 timeframes for everyone to see if we can get, obviously, at least the majority of the committee available for a workshop.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, I'd appreciate it. The only other request I'd make to that is there some way that we could ensure that when this goes out, since we are not all present, that maybe there is a description of the workshop, like, so people understand what we're even asking of them and what we're discussing? I think it would be
I can give
appreciative.
a little summary, just
Just
letting them know
include it
that
in
this
there? That'd be
is,
helpful.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, a result of our conversation here and give enough background so that people aren't confused.
Yes, I know. I'm just thinking if it was me, that's where I would be. I'm like, oh yeah, what did I miss and what is this really about? So thank you. That would be helpful. Well, then, all right, I apologize. I was not keeping track of time at all. I think we are definitely okay at this moment. Are we scheduled to wrap up at 7? Is that or sooner, or kind of whenever we get to? I see a start to the agenda and I don't see an end. Just-
Right, we don't
kind of
have an
really have an
end.
end?
We
All right.
we aim for a time frame, but.
Around, okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something, thank you. Well, other thoughts on, I think, honestly, thank you for bringing it to the table. It's not necessarily new. I really didn't understand or know that this has been before the council to the extent that it has, and that this much work has been behind it. So, if you need to push, by all means, hey, you're here, you're doing your job in some ways, so I appreciate that. And then helping to be this liaison, this is gonna be good, interesting to work with you. And I appreciate that as well. But just personally, yeah, I need to process things. So I do need to understand things. So the background stuff, while it might look like some delay and might, fall into some obfuscation of bureaucracy and how things get lost, and, that's not my intent. I don't think that's the intent of anyone here by any means. It's just some of these things come at us and it's not really a lot of background. So I guess, maybe just for me personally, in future engagements and when things get put out there, just to help facilitate that, the more information we can have, I think, is better upfront.
Just to second that, it would be helpful to have that background information you referred to prior to us having the workshop, for sure.
Yeah, just in general. So I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you, Beth. Is there anything else anyone has to say or add to that one? Discussion, okay. Then I guess, are we good? I would like to move into our next talking point. And I believe I should probably ask you to maybe kind of lead us here, Aaron, if you would. Discuss potential options and next steps around initiatives to decriminalize marijuana in Oshkosh.
Sure. Thank you. So this one, okay, so really what the conversation was, or what the purpose of this is to, again, decide how to move forward on this issue. And really the reason why I brought it to this committee was because, when talking with other counselors and the city manager, the question was, what committee really should address this, or should it just come to council? And, my idea is always to go to a committee first, just to get more input, because I think the more input on a topic like this, the better. And I'd like to see this come to council, but this is a multifaceted topic. And one way where it connects, obviously, is, the criminal justice aspect and the social justice aspect. There's other ones, but I think part of that does fall in this committee, some of those discussions that we've seen regarding this issue. But really, what I wanted to do, why I wanted to put this on there, is just to get an idea of how to move forward on this issue. And my thoughts, again, was doing a joint workshop to get all the stakeholders involved and have this conversation on how we want this to look. And I already have a document. It's the Madison, what they passed. It's 2 pages. It's very short, very to the point. And the idea was to look at that, make changes based on what we feel comfortable with our community, and eventually sending that to council. But obviously there's steps that come before that. But my hope would be to do some type of workshop, including council, the DA, sheriff's office, police, all that, et cetera, legal, and decide how we would want some type of ordinance to look. And the nice part is there is a stepping point, so we don't have to start from scratch. But again, just purely discussion on moving forward, not on the topic itself.
Interesting. So if I just heard you correct, just discussion around moving forward, not necessarily on the topic
Yeah.
itself. Well, I'm not really certain personally, sir, how I would be able to make a recommendation to move forward on something unless we discuss the topic. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, something.
Were you trying to get at whether this even lands within us and we should go forward? Is that what you're trying, that we should figure out whether this is our issue and we should
Is
have
that-
that
okay,
discussion?
okay.
Is that what you're?
I mean, that can be part of the discussion. It's either, I mean, I don't see any other committee that this would really go through.
Okay, I
And if it doesn't go through a committee, that's fine, then it goes right to council. But I think the idea is to involve, people who share some part of that subject. If we're talking about this issue, there's many topics, whether it's like the economic side of it or the social justice side. I think this is a committee that would contribute a lot to that discussion when it reaches into social issues, criminal justice reform, things like that. And that's why I think a workshop would be great. So those people that, are experts in those specific areas can give their input. So it doesn't necessarily have to start from this committee, but that's why I put it on here to have that, figure out if it is this committee's role to, lead this issue or if it just goes right to council.
Thank you for that, asking that clarifying question. I felt I was missing something for sure. Judging from a few looks, you're like, yeah, I don't think you're on topic there, guy. So that's all good. No, Aaron, I don't know. This one, thank you, because I was trying to stretch my mind around it, and all I could touch on was criminal justice, kind of reform and social justice. Like, really, where does this intersect? Why is this coming before our committee? It was like, okay, I could start to see that. But as to, I think, really the question we're being asked, from what I'm understanding, is, are we the committee to lead this charge, and is that really our space? I mean, while it does intersect, I can recognize that. I guess I'd definitely open it to discussion then to begin with. Is this something that we feel collectively that we should be sort of leading, or strictly, I mean, as an advisory body, just advising, as is our charge, So it's a question that I continually struggle with, like, what is the true role of an advisory committee when we are yet to even be formally recognized, outside of the advisory capacity? We have no real authority in that regard. So I appreciate you coming to us, and it does make sense. I guess that's just kind of something that I struggle with, since we are still fledgling, and we just really, I should stop saying that, but it feels that way because we're just advisory, and that's just the way I take these things generally. Yeah, I don't know, like, some thoughts or discussion?
So I kind of had the same thoughts. I think, yeah, it can intersect. I think we can find that piece. But my concern, just based on how we operate here, it's going to delay a lot of other things that I think are important, because
Yes.
our process tend to be slow. And so even though I believe strongly in this, I think the city council should, it feels like they're bouncing it off to delay or have somebody else say, yes, let's go ahead. And I think, I don't know if this is the place to do that. I think, I think the city council should really take it up and make that decision. I think it's, they have to take a stand to some degree, as to where it goes, Yeah, so, if we decide as a group that this is what we want to touch, it's fine, but I think we get delayed on a lot of other things. We take a lot of time to go through processes here. And we've been in it for 6 months, and it feels like we're not going anywhere yet. A year. Oh, my God.
Next month, yep.
Oh, that's even worse now than I thought.
Oh, no, Joaquin, no.
But, I mean, it's like we've been moving very slowly. We're starting to get our feet settled and starting to understand things a little better. And so, I don't want to use this as, I don't want this to be another delay in what we're moving in our process,
No, I think that's a valid point. Yeah, please do, Angie.
I think I would say it does come under our interest because, the statistics show that people of color are 4 times more, prone to be arrested. And even if their white counterpart is, there's equal number of users, people of color, particularly black and brown people, are 4 times more likely to be arrested. And so, and then, just the historical context of cannabis and how it's been used to, suppress communities of color. I think thinking about the historical context and the current, it's extremely, complicated, when you think about reform and what that might look like, even in past criminal offenses. It's very tricky and complex, but I think our committee is, it does come under our interest and obligation to at least have the space to discuss, even if we are the portal to the council to make that recommendation, and even if it's just our advice or, part of our advisory duties, to make aware of those issues that intersect between decriminalization and race equity.
I think I'm a little hung up on our mission statement, and though I agree with everything people have shared with that intersect and the importance of this issue and that it needs to be addressed, I worry sort of along the lines of what Keen said, that it's going to hold us back from getting our strategic plan developed and some of the other things that we've already identified that are a little bit more in line with our mission statement. So I sort of have that question, or it's kind of bringing me back a little bit.
Can I jump in real quick?
Oh,
Do you
please
mind?
do, yeah. Just
And I will say,
in a row.
regardless of, the direction the committee takes, the intention is, even if this starts at council, that this committee would still be invited, to throw in their input, because like you said, there are, this does to an extent fall under what this committee is, charged with. And, even if the committee's not, sending an exact ordinance, it could be something as simple as, oh, we support, this subject, or, we support this, or we don't support this. And like the actual ordinance itself would come, from a councilor to the council. There's a bunch of avenues that this could go through, or how this process could look. So like I said, really the point of this was to kind of gauge that, does the committee feel comfortable, or what route do they want to take, or do they just kind of want to leave this to, the city council to take on? And I don't think there's any wrong answer, but it helps give me direction on how to, what next step to take on this issue.
Yeah, I understand.
I think it'll be a good idea to have a discussion amongst us to make an informal recommendation to the city council, because I will have no problem doing that. I'm in favor of that, but I don't know how the council feels, but we can certainly have a discussion and make a recommendation. It's a unity to them. It's a unit to them.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that makes total sense, and that would be our advice. We could provide some advisory guidance or information. It sounds like you were just reading some stats. There's probably a lot of thought there. I don't know if we would need us to formally make a motion that we're gonna, craft some, just advisory resolution, or whatever you want to call it, draft a memo to council. Like, how do you wish to receive any input from us is really kind of the format of what I'm getting at. Like, if we do, and what would that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it's whatever the committee feels comfortable with. We do our committee reports at our council meetings, and I'm, if it's the committee decides that, this is something they're supportive of, I'm happy to just say that, at our last committee meeting, they expressed their support of this, or, whatever you relate to me. If it's something very specific you want me to say, I'm happy to take it in writing, or even if it's, the committee sending an informal memo or something to council. It's really whatever the committee's comfortable with.
I make a motion that we put this on our next month's agenda to develop, to have a discussion and potentially develop that.
Okay.
Would it be possible to receive something in writing, some of these stats, some of the logic behind it, so we as individuals can read it, can research, so when we come, we're equipped? Because I'm feeling we get a lot of things thrown at us, things that I've never experienced, things that I've never really thought about, and all of a sudden we're going to vote on it. So I really like paper trails, and we have the ability to send things up in the document, and all of us can read it on our time then come back prepared to discuss.
I'd also be happy to provide the Madison document that we're working off, that I'm going to be working off of, as like our starting point, kind of to get it. And they provide a lot of context in there, you know, definitions, you know, exact procedures, how things are enforced, fines, et cetera, et cetera. So just as a starting point, you know, I'm happy to provide that.
That'd be
Because
really
that's what we're
helpful.
going to be working from.
Perfect, thank you.
And I can add to that by adding articles, maybe that could be very informative.
Okay, well, I believe Beth had made a motion to add this to our next agenda to further, I believe, crafting. And Beth, correct me if I'm, our
Recommendation? Is that what-
Discuss, have a discussion and potential recommendation.
okay.
I second
What's
that
your-
motion.
Okay, thank you. All right, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, opposed? All right. Well, thank you for bringing that up. Looking forward to more information. That's going to be very helpful as well. I guess we have our last item, still an outstanding issue. I don't know if there are any updates or reports about the Chief Monument, the enhancement project. I guess that was something we had asked, just kind of receive some ongoing updates as things moved along. I was really pleased to see what, you know, from last month and things we had heard, so.
Right, I can certainly provide a short update.
Thank you.
So, based on the memo that you received from Mr. Fitzpatrick, they did reach out to all of the other committees and boards that might be interested in participating. Only the Parks and Landmarks committees are interested in being part of this process, so we will be forwarding the recommendation to them. They'd like to then give input back regarding the proposal that you guys have received from,
Dr. Manning?
thank you, Dr. Manning. And then they will provide their feedback, and we will receive that and determine next steps in conjunction with City Manager Roloff.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Is there going to be, is there an estimated timeline on that process, since this is sort of happening, you know, in its own course to some extent? Do we know
Right,
when they're
I-
going to receive that and when we could expect something?
I believe we can send it to them for their next meeting. I don't know if it can get on their next agendas, but we will certainly get that out to them as soon as possible so that they can determine when and how they get that on their agenda to discuss.
Okay, that would be great. And, you know, it would be, I would appreciate it, for sure. Just let us know maybe when that goes out, just so I can kind of keep an eye on things as this moves along, just for my own brain. If you don't mind, you know, I would appreciate it. That'd be very helpful. Was there any other thoughts or anything anyone had a question on? About
On
what's coming?
this
On the Chief Oshkosh, what Michelle just shared? No, like, you're good with the next steps? Okay. Yeah, I would really like to see that continue and move along, and it's really great to hear. So, love to hear what the Parks and Landmarks Committee have to say about it. All right, well, that is the end of our agenda.
Actually,
Is there-
I had mentioned the update about the committee that I'm on, and it didn't make it on the agenda. Is it,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's fine. That was fine. It won't take very long. So
No, we have
Angie
time,
reached
thank
out to me. The Oshkosh Area Community Foundation, the one in Appleton or Fox Valley and Green Bay, we're looking for 2 committee members specifically for the basic needs giving. And they were very, very specific. They wanted to include some persons of color, which was missing, and they wanted to rectify that. But they also wanted people who had life experiences in the basic needs, people who had been, you know, abused spouses or homeless or drug addicts, whatever it was. So what this committee does is they control a lot of money. And this committee are the people who listen to the grant proposals, discuss them, and make awards. So I am officially I'm on that committee, not specifically because of this committee, but Angie opened that road. And I have to say, as somebody relatively new to Oshkosh, learning my way around, this is such an honor to be on this committee with these people, but I think it's really gonna give a lot of impact for this committee. So I want to thank you, Angie, for that suggestion. I met with them 2 meetings, and then I officially was a voting member last week. And it's, yeah, I think that'll be very, very helpful for me personally, understanding my community, but also for this committee.
Yes.
Well, congratulations. That's really great to hear.
Because I don't have enough to do, so let's add more.
Well,
So thank you.
No, I think it's a good example as to why you're here and the fact that we have a lot of passion and interest to see things improve for all people in this city. And I think that's really to the heart and core of what our committee's about, and you're
So
a
I
living
was-
example as
I was
well. So
very,
we're
very
all-
honored
We're all
and,
doing that, and that's really
yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, so thank
Thanks
you.
for sharing
You're
that.
welcome. And, I mean, to add to that, it was just this idea of, diversifying the people who are the movers and shakers of money in our city. So we need to diversify that. I would like to add, I did not have a chance to officially welcome Aaron to our committee. He will be serving as our liaison. We are so excited to be working with you and appreciate your enthusiasm. And so welcome and thank you for your input today.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be fun. It's great. Well, with all of that, I guess I would call for the meeting to be adjourned. We have to
Make
make
a
a
motion.
motion.
I'll move to adjourn.
All right.
Make a
Second.
motion. Oh, second.
Okay.
Aye.
All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? No, thank you. Great. Yeah, and thanks for putting this on my lap, guys. Appreciate it.